It all began with a 6-year-old girl who unknowingly ate a pinch of glowing radioactive powder, thinking it was magic. Within days, her body began to rot and decay from the inside out, a slow and agonizing process that ended with her dying utterly alone in a high-security isolation ward. But even after her breath left her body, there was no peace for her soul. Thousands of terrified and angry citizens rioted in the streets of the city, determined to prevent her small body from being buried in their soil. At the time of the funeral, her remains were already sealed inside a specialized fiberglass coffin, reinforced with thick lead plates and encased in heavy concrete to contain the radiation pouring off her. Yet, in a bitter twist of irony, the people truly responsible for this nightmare never faced a single day of life-threatening danger themselves. This catastrophe was triggered by the simple greed and ignorance of 2 scavengers who stole a heavy metal capsule filled with a silent killer. Once that capsule was forced open, an invisible leak sparked a wave of terror that affected over 110,000 people in just 2 weeks. Countless individuals were radiated, leading to the slow, painful decline of an entire metropolitan area. This remains the eternal scar of Goiânia, Brazil, a tragedy often misattributed to other places, but one that the International Atomic Energy Agency officially calls one of the world's most devastating radioactive accidents in history. The story actually traces back to a petty and bitter legal dispute over a medical facility known as the Goiânia Institute of Radiotherapy. In 1985, the institute moved to a new location, but a conflict over the building's ownership left a valuable radiotherapy unit trapped inside the abandoned structure. Neither the institute nor a local volunteer organization would back down in court. Eventually, the volunteer organization seized the building by force of law, refusing to let the institute remove their equipment. Despite repeated urgent warnings from the institute that the machine contained a lethal source of cesium-137, the danger was completely ignored by the authorities. 4 months before the disaster, the institute's owner even sent a formal letter warning the government that they would be held fully liable for any leakage or accident. In response, the court did the bare minimum. They hired a single security guard to watch over a nuclear time bomb. On the morning of September 13th, 1987, that guard skipped his shift to take his family to the movies. Seizing the opportunity, 2 scavengers named Roberto and Wagner broke into the crumbling building. They saw the heavy lead and metal components of the machine and saw only a payday, imagining the scrap would sell for a fortune. They dismantled the unit and removed the metal capsule containing cesium chloride, exposing the radioactive core directly to the open air. By the very next day, both men were gripped by uncontrollable vomiting and severe diarrhea. They felt as though their insides were burning, yet they never once suspected the small metal capsule. Wagner's left hand began to swell and develop horrific ulcers, but when he sought help, a doctor misdiagnosed it as a simple food allergy and sent him home with basic medication. While Wagner suffered at home, Roberto continued to strip the machine down. He eventually used a screwdriver to force open the capsule's lead window, scraping out a small amount of a mysterious glowing blue powder. He had never seen anything like it. He initially thought it was a type of exotic gunpowder and even tried to light it with a flame to see if it would explode. But to his confusion, nothing happened. On September 18th, Roberto finally sold the scrap metal and the glowing capsule to a local junkyard owner for about $25. He walked away happy, having no idea that those $25 were effectively the price tag for the city's future and the lives of his neighbors. The junkyard owner, a man named DeVere, was immediately captivated by the capsule. In the darkness of his garage, it emitted an eerie, beautiful blue light caused by the intense radiation ionizing the air around it. Convinced he had found something supernatural or a gift from the heavens, he took it into his home. This was the late 1980s, an era when neon colors and fluorescent materials were a massive cultural trend. This fascination with things that glowed blinded everyone to the extreme danger they were holding in their bare hands. De Vere invited his family and friends over to witness the miracle, passing the powder around like a curiosity. They touched it, rubbed it on their skin like glitter, and marveled at the light. One guest, a local bus driver, unknowingly carried the radioactive dust onto his daily route, exposing thousands of passengers as he drove through the heart of Goiânia. This set the stage for a silent, invisible panic that was about to explode. 3 days later, a friend of De Vere's pried the capsule fully open, revealing salt-like grains that filled the room with a brilliant blue glow. De Vere was so excited that he began sharing the powder with his loved ones as if it were a precious treasure. But the miracle soon turned into a nightmare. His wife, Gabriela, was the first to realize something was horribly wrong as she watched her health and the health of her friends vanish overnight. She was the hero of this story, the first to raise the alarm, noticing that everyone who touched the blue dust was falling ill at the exact same time. However, by the time she spoke up, De Vere had already sold the contaminated metal to a second scrapyard, further spreading the poison. The disaster soon claimed its most heart-wrenching and innocent victim. De Vere's brother, fascinated by his brother's discovery, took some of the powder home and scattered it on his floor. He encouraged his 6-year-old daughter, Leide, to play with it, thinking it was a magical toy. The little girl laughed as she covered her arms and face in the glowing dust. And in the tragic peak of the accident, she accidentally got some of the powder on a sandwich and ate it. She had ingested a massive, lethal dose of radiation. There was no medical miracle that could save her. Within days, her mouth, throat, and stomach began to ulcerate. Every breath and every swallow became an agonizing form of torture. When the radiation was finally detected by the government, she was rushed to a naval hospital and placed in total isolation. No one could touch her without a lead suit. She died terrified, isolated, and in pain from a systemic infection. Gabriela, De Vere's wife, eventually took matters into her own hands. Despite suffering from hair loss and internal bleeding herself, she went to the second scrapyard, bought the capsule back, and carried it across the city in a plastic bag on a public bus. When she arrived at the hospital, she was in a state of mental confusion and organ failure. A doctor at the facility finally suspected radiation poisoning and placed the bag in an isolated area, alerting the municipal government. The response was chaotic. The first firefighters on the scene arrived with no protective gear at all and were actually told by some officials to throw the bag into the nearby river to get rid of it. Because cesium chloride dissolves easily in water, this act would have poisoned the entire region's water supply for generations. Fortunately, a physicist arrived at the last second to stop them, revealing that the toxic waste was actually a high-level radioactive source. The cleanup operation that followed looked like a scene from a war zone. The city was placed under a strict lockdown, and the source was eventually buried under a massive block of concrete. Over 112,000 citizens were forced to stand in long lines for radiation screening. While official government reports claimed only 250 people were contaminated, many locals and independent experts believe the true number of victims was far higher and covered up to prevent a national panic. The direct deaths included 2 scrapyard workers, the brave Gabriela and the young Leide. Because Leide's body was still emitting dangerous levels of radiation, her burial sparked a massive riot. 2,000 people used stones and wet cement to block the cemetery roads, convinced that her body would poison the groundwater of their neighborhoods forever. It took armored police vehicles and a heavy military presence to finally lay the little girl to rest. In the decades since the accident, the people of Goiânia have lived under a shadow of intense discrimination. They were treated as outcasts, shunned by the rest of the country as if they were contagious. The city's trade and economy collapsed as people refused to buy goods produced in a nuclear zone. Paradoxically, the 2 scavengers who started the entire chain of events managed to survive, though both had to undergo multiple amputations due to radiation burns. De Vere, the junkyard owner who thought he found a miracle, survived the initial exposure, but died in 1994, his life destroyed by depression and heavy drinking. The father who gave the powder to his daughter died 16 years later, never having recovered from the guilt. As for the Institute and the volunteer organization whose petty legal battle caused the mess, they were never fully held to account. Only 3 doctors were ever convicted of negligence, and even they were eventually pardoned by the government. Today, more than 30 years after the blue glow first appeared, many victims are still waiting for the compensation and justice they were promised.